Do you know, when Moses died, the Bible tells us his eye was not dimmed and his strength had not gone. It doesn't say anything about his patience or his temper. He must have been a marvelous man to have even stayed with the children of Israel all those years. Every time he took his eyes off them, they were up to some new nonsense. I'm surprised he even bothered after the golden calf business. Honestly, if they'd behaved themselves and had a bit more faith and done what they were told, they could have finished the whole thing in about 18 months. They brought this 40 years in the wilderness on themselves. There is a saying, it's used a lot in Israel. The saying goes, "The impossible we do right away. Miracles take a little longer." It sounds a bit cocky, although they have done some remarkable things in Israel. But in this saying, I always feel a sort of familiarity with miracles. I mean, most of the miracles we know about took place in and around the land now called Israel. I met a man in Israel once, steel-rimmed glasses, a tall, powerful, sun-tanned fellow, technical, scientific, skeptical sort of man. A hydrologist. That means an expert on water and where to find it. We stayed together overnight on a kibbutz. He talked to me about the problems of finding water in that parched little country until my head and my heart ached. And then he stopped and smiled and said, "Or we take a stick and bang on a rock, like Moses." I asked him if it would work, and he said, "Well, why not, if you pray a little first?" He was gone next morning, but I think of him often. A nice picture. A hot, tired, unsuccessful scientist putting his instruments and meters to one side while he says a quiet little prayer and bangs on a nearby rock with a stick. And in that part of the world, not being too surprised if water did come. So, miracles and wonderful happenings and food from heaven and a man who talked face to face with God. A story full of adventure. For years and years, clever men have been trying to prove or disprove how it was possible or impossible, as if that mattered. If you need to suspend logic for this story, suspend it. If you need to give up a little sophistication to enjoy the marvelous adventures of Moses and the 12 tribes, then give it up. Your logic and sophistication won't run away. They'll still be there when we finish the story. They may look a little sillier, but they'll still be there. So, let us begin with a relative of Moses, Joseph. Yes, that one. Joseph and his great friend Pharaoh. Pharaoh, who made Joseph's big family so welcome when they all moved down from Canaan to Egypt. He even lent them some wagons for their stuff. He gave them good land, too, a place called Goshen. Joseph's family and their families settled down and were very happy in Egypt, Hebrews and Egyptians living in great harmony. You see, it can happen. However, the years went by, and the picture changed. Over 400 years went by, and Joseph and his brothers, the 12 sons of Jacob, had become many thousands of people, not very happy people. For the original Pharaoh's descendant, the present one, was not quite so friendly. In fact, he was an absolute horror. He thought of forced labor camps about 3,000 years before Hitler did, and used the Hebrews of Goshen pretty well as slaves. They were set to clearing land and making bricks and building a great new city. "Work 'em to death," said Pharaoh. "There are too many of them. Too many, they'll swamp us and smother us." One day, this madman thought up a new one. A terrible thing. "From now on," he said, "every boy, baby born to the Hebrews is to be killed." Well, you can imagine. The babies were thrown into the Nile. Every day the sad little coffins floated down the great river. So, there is your background. Now we begin to focus. It is night time. A narrow street. A man walks along it, and you can tell by his clothes and the way he walks that he's both poor and very tired. His name is Amram, and he is one of the Hebrew slaves of Goshen. A slave. Back-breaking work, treated like animals and kept near to starvation. No foreman, men with whips. Amram, in one way, was lucky. He could come home at night. A hovel, half a house, 2 tiny rooms, but home. Thousands like him had no home. They lived in great camps up north, near the delta. Amram thought of the delta and of the great river Nile, where every day the newborn babies by order of great Pharaoh were thrown into the river. Not a sacrifice, not a whim, the order of a madman. Every baby boy born to the Hebrews to be drowned. And there were plenty of Egyptian spies and secret police to see it done. Oh, a great game. It quite enlivened the day for them. Of course, not every birth was discovered. No birth certificates or hospitals. Very few doctors available to these thousands of slaves. Women helped each other, and the midwives were Jewish and told lies in their reports to the police. But it was, at best, a postponement. And when, after a month or 2, the baby was found, and there were frequent raids, it was worse, much worse. Amram stopped at the low door where he lived. It will be terrible for us, too, he thought to himself. Terrible. Lovely baby, nearly 3 months old and never seen the sun. Hidden, wrapped up, kept quiet. But now, no longer easy to keep quiet. He looked to both sides and went in. He went through to the rear room. By a small oil lamp sat his family. His wife Jochebed and his daughter Miriam, who was 11, and his small son Aaron, who was 3 and fast asleep. Amram glanced upward at the ceiling. Between it and the roof rafters above it, the baby was hidden. He sat down and looked at his wife and daughter. He thought again how alike they were. The same firm jaw, the same steady dark eyes, the same capable hands. Both had the same patience and love of children. Both gave off a sort of warmth. Amram relaxed a little and then paused. He was sensitive to his wife and daughter, and tonight they were giving off a different sort of feeling, a sort of suppressed excitement. Jochebed and Miriam moved closer to Amram. His wife's eyes were bright. I prayed, she said, and a plan came. It must have been in my mind for months. Before the baby was born, I noticed that many mothers made tiny coffins for their babies, of reeds. Sometimes they would get caught in the bulrushes. The guards ignore them. I'm going to make one for our baby. A coffin, said Amram. No, said Jochebed. Not a coffin, a floating cradle. I'm going to make it waterproof with pitch and oiled linen, and I'll make certain it will be caught in the bulrushes, and I know where, too. Amram stared at his wife and waited. Miriam, said Jochebed, your clever daughter has made friends with one of the serving maids of Pharaoh's daughter, and she's not like her father. She longs to be married and to have children, but no suitors are encouraged at the palace. Every day she bathes in the river not half a mile from here. It is a secluded place, about 30 yards long, with a screen of tall bulrushes at each end. After she bathes, the princess walks up and down. Now Amram was sitting very still. In 2 days' time, said Jochebed, the princess will find a live baby in the rushes. The most beautiful baby she's ever seen. He will be clean and sweet, and she will love him at sight. And who could not? Tomorrow I make the cradle. And then, said Amram, then, said his wife rather placidly, our Miriam, who will be nearby, washing clothes in the river, will ask the princess whether she would like to have a woman look after the baby for her in secret. The princess will say yes, and Miriam will run and fetch me. Jochebed leaned forward and kissed her dazed husband. "And I," she said, "will be the first woman in history to be both mother and foster mother to the same child at the same time. You'll see," she said, "it will come to pass." And it did. A wonderful, heart-breaking sort of joke. For Jochebed was paid wages to bring up her own baby. He was to be brought up until he could be taken by the princess to live at court, but that was to come. In the meantime, thought Jochebed, he's mine, and he's alive. She brought him up carefully, and the princess visited regularly and secretly. But a day came when the princess told Jochebed that the boy would from then on live at the palace as an Egyptian. The two women looked at each other. Then the princess said, "The boy has been safe with you. I promise you, he shall be safe with me." Jochebed, who was near to tears, said, "One thing, princess, we are Hebrews, and the boy has a Hebrew name." "Ah, yes," said the princess, "at court that won't do. I shall call him Moses, which is more Egyptian than Hebrew." And that is not a bad description of the boy who grew to manhood at court. Moses, more Egyptian than Hebrew. He was a quiet sort of youth and inclined to be shy. He was thoughtful and modest. He used to visit Jochebed when he could. And one day, when she was sure of his discretion, she told him what he'd suspected for a long time, that she was his mother, and that her son, the friendly, cheerful Aaron, was his brother, and that Miriam, older than both Aaron and himself, was his sister. The quiet Amram looked at Moses and was proud of this tall, strong young man with the rather serious face. "Well, my son," he said, "so you are one of us, a Hebrew, one of the children of Israel, and yet you live in an Egyptian palace, and an Egyptian princess is like a mother to you. What you have learned today about us and yourself will not change anything, except perhaps the way you think about the slaves." A wise man, Amram, and he was right. Moses began to spend more and more time away from the idleness of the palace. He walked and stood and watched and asked questions. He saw a whole people in slavery, overworked, beaten, underfed. He saw great cruelty. Dressed in the clothes of an Egyptian, carrying the staff that showed he was of the court, he could go anywhere and see everything. He trained himself to show no emotion at the appalling treatment he witnessed of his brother Hebrews, and in his mind he now called them brothers. No emotion. Until one day he found in himself a rage and a fury that left him shocked and trembling, and left a sadistic Egyptian guard dead at his feet. Moses was scared. To kill a guard was punishable by death, member of the court or not. He steadied himself and looked around. The elderly slave, whose beating had been the last straw for Moses, had fainted. No one else was about. Moses lifted the guard's body and carried it to a nearby gully and buried it, and went and stayed the night in the poor quarter of the city with Amram.